This is a demonstration of a circular cast-on that could be used for a hat that is knit for the top, from the top down, or perhaps a circular shawl. It is sometimes called Emily Ocker's cast-on, and it is wonderful for making a very tight, tidy cast-on when you knit from the top down. To start this cast-on, you will need a crochet hook that is roughly the same size as the knitting needles that you intend to use, possibly a little smaller, but preferably not any bigger, because that will make the loops that you create just a little too large. So crochet hook, and of course your working yarn that you intend to use. And you need your finger. And to start this cast on, take the yarn by the tail and wrap it around your finger clockwise 2 times. So the yarn is hanging off the back of the end of your finger and the working yarn is in front of your hand. So hang on to that yarn tail. I'm going to pull it just a little bit longer. Hang on to the yarn tail and move those 2 loops of yarn that are over your finger so they're nice and close to each other. Take your crochet hook and go underneath that first loop and grab the second loop and pull it under that working loop. Grab another loop of yarn and pull it through. Your first stitch is created and is now sitting on your crochet hook, which is where it needs to be for now. Go back under the loop of yarn on your finger, pull the working yarn through to create a loose loop, and go back and pull another loop through that to create your second stitch. Go under the loop of yarn, pull working yarn through to create a loop, go over the loop of yarn, pull another loop through that third loop. 3 stitches created, and continue on for as long as you need, and generally that will be 4, 6, 8, possibly 9 stitches. So, whoops, I missed a little piece of my loop there. I've now created 4 stitches and they are sitting on my crochet hook as though they were sitting on a knitting needle. I'm stretching out my loop a little bit because I need some room to actually create the stitches. I am now up to 6. I'm going to go all the way to 9. Here's my 7th stitch. Eight, 9. 9 stitches are sitting on my crochet hook, and the loop of yarn is hanging down below the crochet hook. At this point, I need to transfer my stitches onto knitting needles. So I'll grab my first knitting needle and, carefully keeping out of the way of that hook there, move 3 stitches onto my first double point needle. Grab my second double point needle and 1 more double point needle. Now it's time to rearrange my needles with my 9 stitches so that they're all going in the right direction. I'm going to pull that loop just a little bit just so that I can make sure that I'm orienting my stitches correctly, because if I don't, my loop will not close up. So there's the bottom of the loop still hanging there, and my working thread is coming underneath, and that yarn tail is just dangling there, and I will let it dangle for a while. So now I will knit one round. I've gone around once, the yarn tail's just hanging down. And now the instructions for my pattern say to increase by knitting into the front and back of each loop. So I've now increased into the front and back of each stitch, so I now have 18 stitches total, divided onto 3 needles. I will now knit around a few more times according to the pattern, because I don't want to pull the loop tight yet to close the hole. It's easier to keep knitting with these middle stitches still on the loose side. So now when I look at my knitting and I turn it over, I can clearly see that the yarn tail is still coming up between these 2 needles, this needle here, and this needle here. That tells me that this is the beginning of my round. This is needle 1, the beginning of my round. However, when I pull this yarn tight, when I get ready to close the hole, that will be really hard to tell which needle is actually the center. So at that point, I will want to place a marker somewhere on one of these stitches, a movable marker, to indicate that this is the beginning of my round. When I move from double pointed needles onto a circular needle, at that point I will exchange the movable marker for a ring marker, and that will indicate the beginning of my round. At this point, I've knit 3 or 4 rounds away from the center. The hole is still rather large and not very sightly, and you wouldn't want it either for the center of a shawl or a scarf, but that is now very easily dealt with. At this point, from the wrong side, it looks like this. You can actually see how the yarn runs through that circle of stitches. And from the right side, the same thing. You can see like a little bump of stitches all the way around. But when I take the yarn tail, which is the short end of the yarn, and I gently tug at it, it tightens right down into a neat little circle. This is what it looks like on the back. And this is what it looks like on the front, which is even nicer. I will leave the yarn tail for a little bit longer. When I'm done with 6 to 10 rows or so, at that point I will weave that yarn tail in